Welcome to the Adventurous Minds podcast, examining fitness and wellness through the lens of outdoor sport and adventure.
Hey everyone, welcome back to episode 3 of Adventurous Minds. Today we've got a great guest, Joe Gray. Joe is a 21-time U.S. champion and a 9-time world champion of his sport, trail running. Joe's achievements are hard to wrap your head around. Nearly a decade of dominance is hard to understand in a notoriously difficult sport. I really enjoyed this conversation with Joe. He's got so many cool stories and tips and tricks for runners, and I can't help but think that you're going to leave this conversation wanting to go run up your closest mountain. Enjoy. Joe, what's going on? Nice to meet you.
Hey, what's going down?
Dude, it's good to see you. It's been, I'm stoked to get this done.
Definitely.
So I just kind of want to start at the beginning. I feel like it's what I normally always do. I just want to get into kind of who you are, all your accomplishments, what you do. But I feel like for the beginning, let's kind of go back and see what you were like as a kid. So where did you grow up?
I was military brat, so we bounced around a little bit, but we were in Germany for a little while during Desert Storm, and then middle school, high school, we were in Washington State, and that's kind of where I would say sports and things like that really started to kick off for me. Obviously, I think I was exposed to a lot of the basics of athletics before that, but that, I would say middle school, high school is where you really start to get into sports and you really start to specialize and become more focused.
Yeah, were you always into running, or what other sports did you play?
No, basketball was always kind of my main sport for many years, and then running came into the picture much later.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's funny that you're kind of disciplined, or it's not funny, but it's interesting that your discipline is kind of in trail running. What kind of led you? Were you into cross country? Like, what led you into trail running rather than staying on the track? I stayed on the track. I still do track, but I think my path into trail running kind of started, years ago when we used to play like team tag, manhunt in the woods and the forest. And I used to always love that and really thrived on exploring trails and just getting out in nature. Simon Gutierrez was kind of a guy that I looked up to, and I was finishing grad school and, didn't have a ton of direction in terms of what I wanted to do besides just doing kind of road, cross country, and track stuff. And then I heard about mountain running through him, and I was like, you can, race on trails and mountains. And so it was very intriguing. And, I immediately jumped into my first race, and, from there it was, part of my journey, and I stuck with it, and here we are today, still in it. Yeah. What about the mountain running really kind of got you? Like what about it's appealing?
I'm very kind of I always tell people I'm kind of like Curious George. I'm very curious about things, and I like to go on adventures and just explore stuff. And that's part of the nature of racing and mountain running is you're on kind of foreign terrain. You're running in areas that, aren't normal. It's also very tough. It's like cross country, which is one of my favorite sports and disciplines in running, except that, there's more to navigate. It's a more technical terrain. It's steeper, you have to deal with weather changes. You have to deal with climate, different terrains around the world, altitude, there's so many more things that come into the strategy of being good or excelling in mountain running. And it really attracted me because I feel like I'm a strategist too. And, I like to strategize and come up with a plan to make sure that, I get the best out of myself in every competition.
Yeah, and it feels like trail running is a lot of problem solving in a way. It's like, when you're on a track, it's like it's just time. But when you're dealing with crazy weather and slippery rocks and different trail conditions, it's a whole different game.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's some races where I've run where it was perfect weather today, and then race day comes and you look out the window and it's completely different. I've run races where, altitude challenges, dealing with getting altitude sick in the midst of a race, or just kind of getting that brain fog that you get when you're extremely high. I did a race up at a volcano in Mexico, and I mean, it was crazy. It was like you're up so high above the cities and just civilization that it's quiet and your heart is thumping and you can hear your heart because there's, I mean, your heart is trying to pump as much blood as it can and there's no oxygen. And I mean, it's just a unique experience to race up, it was like 16,000 feet. And so, uh, I had always thought Pikes Peak was a tough race, and it was 14,000 feet, and I've done a number of FKTs at 14,400 Mount Elbert in Colorado, and I thought those were pretty tough. And then going up this volcano in Mexico, I'm like, man, this is another level.
Dude, I can't imagine. I was out in Colorado last week and I was just going up a staircase and I got to the top and I was like, wow, a staircase normally doesn't doesn't win me like that. I can't imagine trying to run for miles at elevation. That sounds so intense. When when was the first time you really went to elevation and started like running at elevation? Was that a shock for you?
Yeah, well, it was a big shock. The first time my first mountain race was at altitude, and I had been going to school, Oklahoma State, so I was at sea level, humid, and then I go to Colorado 2 days later, and it's hot, very dry, very much sun exposed, and the race started at like 7-something thousand feet, and I think within the first mile I knew that this was going to be very different than I had expected, and that all the expectations I had coming in were kind of thrown out the window, and yeah, it was tough.
Yeah, I imagine. I've done a bit of running. I run, but never competitively or anything like that. But how much does it transfer over? I mean, I feel like it probably doesn't transfer nearly as much as I would think. Like going from running on not flatland, but not at elevation versus elevation. Like the contrast must be crazy. Like athletes that do well at sea level probably don't do very well at elevation. Is there any truth to that?
I mean, there's a lot of science that it's kind of all over the map, but there's some athletes who may very well never respond to altitude and may very well never feel good at altitude. Their body may have issues in terms of developing red blood cells, maybe too slowly, or their body doesn't have the correct response when it's when there's not enough oxygen in the atmosphere for their body. And so there are some people who just simply will never do well at altitude. And vice versa. There are people who do great at altitude. They've been well adapted. They've had generations of their family living at altitude. And when they go to sea level, they have problems with the air being thicker and more saturated with oxygen. And you might see them run pretty close to what they run at altitude. And there's not very much variation. So, obviously there's going to be outliers on both sides of that spectrum. But there's definitely a difference. I mean, granted, if it's not extremely hot or extremely humid when you do come from altitude, and if you do adapt well to the training at altitude and you go down to sea level, you do feel better. You do feel like you're able to run at your, kind of like your threshold. You can maintain it a little bit longer, a little bit more comfortably, at least the pace of it. But, I think something that people fail to realize is that your threshold pace changes when you go down. So, if you think your threshold is 456 at altitude and you don't realize, okay, I'm at sea level, and you still think it's 456, in your mind, you're like, oh, this feels much easier. I can hold it longer, but you do have more oxygen. So that threshold pace does change. And so you have to figure out what that is for you. People try to calculate, the difference, between sea level and altitude, how many seconds per mile. And, I've found it's different. There have been years where I've done tests kind of at both, and there's some times where we're seeing close to, kind of like 9 to 10 seconds per mile. And there's times where it's even more than that. And a lot of the problem with it is barometric pressure. When you're at altitude, barometric pressure affects you physiologically. And so it's kind of hard to measure all those different variables. And for me, it gets too complex. So I'm like, at my age now, and as long as I've been in the sport, competing has always been the number one thing for me. So I just kind of focus on that.
That makes sense. So, one of the things about running, particularly like distance and trail and mountain running, is the kind of the mental fortitude that you need to get through these crazy long runs or just, crazy elevation, whatever it is. Where did you kind of develop that mental strength? Was that something that you kind of always have had, or does it come from a competitive side?
That's a good question. I think, I've always been um, a competitive person, and I think I've had good examples. My mother and my father are um, they're people who work hard. They're not braggarts. They do the work, and they're not expecting you to kind of praise them for the small victories. And so I think mentally, in my mind, the small victories and just victories in essence aren't the bigger picture for me. It's not the thing that I'm chasing. I'm chasing after constant and consistent success and proving myself wrong. I'm my biggest critic, so I want to be able to constantly prove myself wrong and constantly compete with the man in the mirror. And so I think just that mental aspect coming into competition has really allowed me to be at the top of my sport for many years.
Yeah. Have there been any races where like really tested you, like where you like they were notable and you were thinking like, wow, this is much harder than I thought it was going to be, or like I don't know if I'm prepared for this. Has that happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think that happens pretty regularly. Uh, the race I mentioned in Mexico in up the volcano, it was up Iztaccíhuatl, which is a mountain volcano area near Popo, just kind of east of Mexico City. And yeah, I thought, oh, he's 16,000 feet, not a big deal. It's only 2,000 feet higher than, say, Pikes. And about a mile before the top of it, I was just kind of falling apart, like just mentally, um, just felt like I couldn't breathe, and I was like, I couldn't run a straight line anymore. And it challenged me in a way that I had never really felt before. There's races where you run hard and you have plenty of oxygen and it feels different because you can constantly push yourself and sort of recover over a few seconds and keep pushing and pushing. But at that altitude, I was really struggling to make any kind of surges or have any consistency in my pace. And so I was really struggling with just the lack of oxygen. And then also the terrain was getting much more difficult and more technical as you got higher up the mountain. So it just added a whole nother layer of complexity to the race. But it was one of the victories that I'll always remember just because there were things that I experienced that I had never experienced over many many years of running in the sport.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what was that terrain like? Did you start down kind of in the forest
No, you're way above the forest even for the start.
already?
I mean, yeah, it's funny. You're already at over 10,000 feet. The start line is over 10,000 feet. So in itself, it's if you just ran half of that race, it would be difficult. And the first part of it is fairly runnable. It's almost like an ATV road kind of to start, and you're kind of at the base of the mountain, and then you get to the mountain and you start going up, and it's kind of choppy, some rocks, big rocks, boulders, and then the rocks kind of get smaller, and then as you get way high, they have paths kind of going to the peak, and there's big rocks kind of in between, and it's kind of like sandy. So you're already struggling. You've been climbing for a while, and then you're sliding. Like you step in and you're sliding down, and I mean it was just brutal. Like
God, that would stress me out. I'd be worried about just like, I don't know, putting my foot somewhere it shouldn't be and like twisting it or something. I feel like injury's got to be like it's got to be a high chance of kind of getting injured in that scenario.
yeah, ironically, I did get injured there. I uh, probably what was it like 4 miles from the finish line? I was coming down, and it's really choppy. It's a really technical race, and I just rolled my ankle, and
Oh,
I was like, don't look at it, don't stop because I already know my ankle's fat, it's swollen right now, And if I look at it and take any time away, I'm probably going to lose because the guys were not that far off. Like you could see your main competitors because you hit the peak and then you come down a different way, but you can see everyone else as they're still going up. So you kind of know where everyone's at. And I knew I was like, man, I don't have time to play around. Maybe I could stop and readjust it, but I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna try to grind it out and limp my way to the finish line and held them off.
Damn, that's impressive. That must have sparked some fire being able to see them, because I feel like most of the time you don't really know where your competitors are in a way.
Yeah, I mean, like we said, it's you're up so high. There's no vegetation. It's steep terrain, so you can see everybody. Just looking back, it's such a steep part of the race, that last mile there, that you could see all your competitors. And so yeah, definitely. And then, before that, the Mexicans were kind of joking about there's another, US legend guy who's, been in mountain running kind of before my time, but even I got a chance to see him do some things as well. It was Matt Carpenter. And they were joking about how, no Americans come to this race and win. And every time they come, they always, the last part, they always get caught or they get hurt. And, sure enough, when I got hurt, I'm thinking it's like ringing in my head what they just, all these, they were just joking, of course, but there was some truth to the joke. And, but it was ringing in my head when I rolled my ankle and I was like, oh man, I'm gonna get caught in the last mile limping with a fat ankle. And yeah, it was funny to experience.
Just more inspiration to prove them wrong.
Yeah, yeah. But I almost ended up proving them right though. It was
Yeah,
one of those
exactly.
moments where I was pretty confident when I hit the peak. I was pretty confident just before that moment and that I could win. And then when that happened, it was like I'm just hearing all the jokes in my head.
So when you're training for a race like that that's at high elevation, it's going to be really hard. Are you spending all your time training at elevation as well? Are you trying to get as much time in as possible?
Um, not at say like 16 or 14,000. Like
Yeah, yeah.
I think the biggest problem is like when you focus on training extremely high, that you don't recover very well. And then also your body might not be ready for the lower altitudes just because it's such a drastic change. Like you might not think there's much of a difference between say 16,000 and 10,000 feet, but there is in terms of like the weather, how warm it could be. If you're not used to being in warm climates or running when it's warm, it can be a big problem. Up high, once you get acclimated to that altitude, it's pretty comfortable. You're pretty dry. You're not used to getting super sweaty or wet. And, it's kind of like one of the things that I talk to people when I've won pikes a number of times. And, people have kind of emailed me on, tips they wanted to know how to prepare for it. They're like, oh, should I just go train at 14,000 all day? And it's like, in all honesty, you don't spend as much time above tree line if you really look at the race. There's a lot of time below tree line, and that time down there is very important that you learn how to run down there and maximize your energy and your effort and know how to you know transition to running higher, like progress to having less oxygen, making sure that you're keeping your pace under control until you get up higher and you can make bigger moves later. But also dealing with just the sweating and perspiration early on and learning how to hydrate at those lower altitudes is really important. I don't think it's as important to be, for that Mexico race. Obviously, I never was over 14,000 feet because it's also in Mexico. That race was in October or November, one of the two. And so here, getting up to that altitude is very difficult because there's a lot of snow and ice. So, I never really trained high, but I was pretty solid from 6 to say 9,000 feet. And so I had the speed. I just had to be smart about race day and not do anything stupid early on. And I was really smart early on. And then, but just had that little mistake, the hiccup, twisted ankle.
That makes sense. I hadn't thought about, in my mind, it's like if you're going to go compete at high elevation, you want to go and train. But obviously the logistical side of that is very difficult to get that high. And then two, it's like, if 70% or whatever percentage of the race is at a lower altitude, then, that's really what you should be focusing on. Um,
Right.
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
I mean, if the race started at 13,000 feet and you were running, 85% of the race above 13,000 feet, that changes things, obviously.
Right. Yeah. And what is your training structure like? I mean, maybe it's different today than it was 10 years ago, but like, are you super structured with what you do?
I would say more so in road cross country season. I do a lot of my mountain trail stuff by myself, and then in the wintertime, I kind of take a big break, and then I start running with my group most of the most most of my training during that period of time. And I would say it's more structured then. You have your long run, you have your tempos and intervals. You start doing intervals as you progress towards getting closer to race days or your race period. And so, yeah, it's a lot more structured in that period of time. Whereas in the trail season, maybe not as structured, and it's more so familiarity with terrain becomes more important than consistency of workouts.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. That makes sense. And a lot of the people that are listening to this are kind of just first getting into running, or they're starting off. It's like something they want to get into. Do you have any advice for kind of training or like just early structure for someone who's getting into running?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is, I try to tell people, and it's cliche, you hear it all the time, but to progress, and especially when it comes to trail and mountain running, I'm not talking about so much mileage or minutes on the trail. Some people will be like, well, don't jump from 40 miles to 100 miles in a week. I'm more so talking about don't expose yourself to technical terrain that's maybe overwhelming for you too soon. You know, it's something that you can progress. If you're used to grades that are, 5 and 6%, don't jump into something that's like 30%. Make sure that you find something maybe just a slightly steeper the next time you want to have like a hard ascent type workout, as opposed to jumping and, quadrupling the percentage and thinking that it's going to be fine. Um, for two reasons. One, um, you might not finish the workout just out of sheer fear or it being overwhelming or too much for you. But then secondly, you can get injured, you can get hurt. And even as a professional athlete, there's times where I've thrown myself into a situation where the terrain was way too technical for me, and I was not prepared in terms of I didn't have the proper gear or exposure experience dealing with certain rock faces or things like that. And so I put myself in a really bad situation. And, two times in my career, I've almost lost my life doing that. And so I tell people all the time, like, if something is too technical or it's makes you feel uncomfortable, you're not ready for it. You need to take baby steps because ultimately you could lose your life. Like we're not talking, you might hurt an ankle or, break a foot, like you could die. So it's very important that you take those baby steps and you expose yourself to technical terrain slowly over time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we've all kind of made those mistakes. I mean, the amount of times where I kind of went from 0 to 100 a little too quick is probably too often. But yeah, that makes sense. And so, sorry to go back. What's your worst injury from running?
Um, I would say in 2018, I was running and stepped in a hole on a descent, and my pubic symphysis got extremely irritated, and that was rough, man. I was like, I had to take a long time off, try to come back to running. It flared up again, had to take another break, and it just kept giving me issues. And I was getting pain in my groin and my abdomen. It was a very tough injury to deal with, and it took a lot of time away from me. And you know, it was one of those injuries that you just kind of start to get depressed because you're like, maybe running is not going to be in my foreseeable future. And I was trying to come to terms with that because of how much it was hampering my training and just my enjoyment of running. I just wasn't able to enjoy it, and took a lot of rehab to get that situation fixed.
Yeah, that's the issue with injuries. Is like as much as it is a physical injury, it just takes so much. It takes such a toll on your brain and your own mental health that recovering from that can
Right,
really take time. And
right.
how
Because
long was
it's a
that
hobby
total?
too.
No, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying, a lot of times we as runners, we don't realize it's a hobby, it's a passion, it's something we enjoy doing, and it becomes very much a part of our lives. And so when you have an injury that threatens to kind of take that away, it's not like you have an immediate replacement. It's something that you kind of form your life around, and it's difficult to try to figure out what's the next step.
Yeah, when you so much surrounds running, it's like it gives you so much. It's not just the exercise. There's the clarity, and you can really derive a lot from it. So yeah, it can really shake you when you just take something like that out of your life.
For sure.
And what was that? How long was that recovery process in
Man,
total?
it was a lot of time, man. I don't know. I've never actually like tried to count the time, but I know there was definitely 3 month layoff, 3 to 4 month layoff at one point, because I tried to come back after I think I took like 6 or 7 weeks off and tried to come back. It didn't work. And then I had to kind of take small breaks here and there, trying to come back. And then eventually I was like, I went and talked to some doctors. I had some really good doctors look at my MRIs, and they're just like, yeah, man, you're gonna have to take some time away from movement and running because of where it was. Because when you look at the pubic symphysis, it's kind of like attached with a small little. I don't want to call it a tendon, but I should know this, but it's some type. I think we'll just use tendon for
Sure. Yeah.
for now. But when you start to have issues with that pubic symphysis area, if any kind of movement, even cross training, is kind of problematic. And typically, when I take a break, I don't do any cross training. I just take a full on break, and I've been fine. But because of that issue happening, stepping in that hole, taking a break, and then now trying to get back in shape by cross training wasn't helping because it's still moving, it's still causing some inflammation, and it wasn't able to heal. So it just took a couple of different chunks of time where, there's a long period of time where I was not running or doing anything, and also being depressed. So it was a rough period.
Yeah, that is not easy. And I mean, I think injury is something that everyone can relate to. Do you have any kind of words of advice for people that are, going through an injury right now or trying to get back in shape? Because I think that's the hardest part is when you get one of those setbacks, it's impossible or it's not impossible, but it's so hard to get that motivation back.
Yeah, yeah, I think the biggest thing, man, is finding balance in your life. Um, Making sure you tighten up that circle, the people that you trust and love, and people that you can lean on in life. If you don't have that many of them, maybe try to get closer with other people or mend relationships, broken relationships. I think that helps a lot. There were a lot of things that I came to terms with in that period of time in terms of relationships that I feel like I could have improved, and I worked on improving those relationships. And I think that it helped me mentally just look at life differently. And then um, kind of a blessing that was unexpected was having, I think I would say I got lucky having my son in that period of time helped a lot. It allowed me to be a father, and um, just looking in their eye, looking in your kids' eyes when they're little babies, and it gave me a lot of motivation to like stick with the rehab, and you don't want to be such a Debbie Downer or be um, selfish and just be all only into yourself. And so this baby needs a lot of your care and attention and love, and so having that was a good distraction. And I think that helped me and my son. Just it really helped me get through that time. But I do tell people all the time, like, to come to terms with the injury and come to terms with the fact that um, maybe you can't do it anymore, or maybe it's going to look different in the future when it does heal. Come to terms with that, because it'll be a lot easier than coming in and thinking it's going to be peaches and cream and you're going to be even better, a week after the injury goes away. Um, So just coming in with that realistic perspective.
Yeah, I think that's great advice because I mean I broke my wrist last year. It was not a big injury at all, but I remember the doctor told me, he was like, "Yeah, you'll be fine after 2 months. Like you'll be back to full working order." And it took way longer than that. You know, it was like the months after. There were probably 2 more months after that where I was still in pain. I could still feel it. I was still restricted, and I was like, I kind of trusted him too much, or maybe I took it too literally. But I was like, these sorts of things take a lot of time. You know, you need to be realistic about returning to the sports or just returning to normal use of whatever it was that went wrong.
Right. Yep. 100%.
Yeah. And this kind of brings me to a different topic, but how focused are you on your diet? Is that a really big piece of your training?
As I've gotten older, it has become more important to me. Um, and again, some of it is just being a parent. There are things that I would love to eat, and um, certain habits that I had in terms of eating pies and ice creams and things like that, at random times of the day and eating loads of it. And when you have kids watching you, it's like, oh man, they're gonna want to mimic what they see mommy and daddy doing. And so a little bit of it was having to change that, like it definitely, or at least not eating some of those things in front of my kids all the time. But, also I think when you get older, you carry weight longer. It's harder to kind of break down um, certain bad foods, definitely foods like cakes and pies and stuff. And, those were kind of my weakness and still are. And learning how to manage how much of that I'm eating at one time is kind of been very helpful. But in terms of my diet, I just try to make sure it's very diverse. I kind of eat everything. I'm a big believer in you should eat bad and you should fulfill your cravings because your body typically will kind of lead you in the right way. If you have a craving for something, there's a reason for it. There was a time where someone had said that to me. I remember I heard that and I didn't think much of it, but then there was a time where I was really wanting like liver and steak, like heavy. That's all I wanted. And I didn't want to eat nothing else. And, sure enough, we did some blood work and I was struggling with my running at the time. And obviously there was a lot of signs pointing to being low iron. And sure enough, that's what it was. And it's like, well, okay, my body was trying to tell me something. And there's other times where you're craving, something sweet or cakes. And a lot of times it's because you're glycogen depleted and your body's trying to tell you, hey, we need some carbs to kind of help fuel that next workout. And, I'm a big fan of just eating kind of everything across the charts because a lot of times you're traveling and, get used to eating new foods and you might go somewhere where they don't have pancakes and bacon and eggs for breakfast. They might eat something else, something different there in that country. And if you're the kind of person who's extremely type A and extremely like strict diet, you might struggle with travel. And travel is something I really enjoy and very much a part of something that I feel blessed to be a professional runner and to have that privilege. And so, when it comes to diet, I want to make sure that I have a diverse palate and I can land anywhere on the planet and be happy with the food and, and be explorative and then not have any issues with exploring that food or trying something new.
Yeah, it sounds cliche, but listening to your body really is very applicable. And, it will tell you what you need. I mean, clearly it told you that you needed some iron and and to eat some steak. It's I've had that feeling multiple times. I feel like as you get older, it gets easier, and as you know your body more, you can understand really what it wants, particularly when you're working out or whatever it is, because I feel like it gets more and more precise. At least for me. But that's cool to hear. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about COVID. I feel like everyone had a very different experience, some positive, some negative, about that time span. I would love to hear what it was like for you, because I feel like with athletes, some people really took that time as a break and some ramp things up. Where did you land there?
Again, I think it was a period of time where I think mentally I really struggled with the fact that a lot of races got canceled, and I was just extremely, ticked off because um, legacy is very important for me as an athlete, and especially for the athletes I want to inspire, and things I want to accomplish in my career. And so during the pandemic, just knowing I wasn't going to get that opportunity was very frustrating, and it was difficult to kind of digest. But then at the same time, there was a lot of blessings in disguise in terms of, um, I think I was dealing with a little injury, and it gave me some time to focus on that injury and figure out the discrepancies in my stride and my strength and my imbalances, and kind of work on that slowly over time. And because there was no competition. And then on top of that, I think traveling a lot sometimes you can lose out on a lot of moments as a parent, and especially if you're an athlete, you can lose out on a lot of moments with your children. And we had our son already. He's about two, almost two during the pandemic, and my daughter was born right as the pandemic hit. And so we were trying to get, we got lucky in the hospital situation where they weren't letting the dads in, and there was, a lot of hoopla going on in terms of who could be there. And during the delivery, we got out just in time. She was born just in the nick of time. I think like a couple of days later, things changed drastically
Wow.
for pregnancy and the delivery period. But having two kids and being home during that time, it was nice because it was I had a lot of time with my children and got to see them grow up and do all these little things with them. And I don't know, it was kind of cool seeing them during their potato stage. I didn't get to see as much of the potato stage with my son because I was traveling a lot, during his first year. And so having my daughter there and just experiencing that, it was nice. And by the end of that period of time, I realized, like, the pandemic, it was rough on us economically, and I think mentally it changed a lot of with how we communicate. It changed our social fabric in a lot of negative ways in terms of how we treat one another. But with pushing that aside, I was happy with the family component side of it.
Yeah, that's nice. Getting to spend some time with your family is definitely a good thing, especially when they're young like that. That's really nice. And it must be exciting being a young dad. Have the kids? I know we kind of got into this earlier, but how have the kids changed your perspective on not necessarily running, but being healthy? Have they kind of changed anything about that?
Healthy in terms of like
Just overall health and kind of being around for them.
yeah. I mean, you do. There's a lot of things that you maybe even bad habits you might have that are not healthy for longevity, and you start to look at those things differently because you're like, man, um, kind of want to see my kids like at the same age that I am now doing what I'm doing right now. I want to experience seeing them do it. I want to witness that. And so you do kind of get this idea that you want to be around for that, God willing. And so, yeah, it has changed a lot with me in terms of how trying to take care of myself, and but also realizing that no day is promised and tomorrow's not promised, and making sure that I show them love and compassion and make the most out of our time together that we have now, that um, time that we can't lose, we already have it. And not expecting that I'll do this with my son tomorrow because I don't feel like doing it right now, or I'm being lazy or something like that. It's like, no, I got the time. I'm going to do it now because, who knows what tomorrow holds.
Yeah, and it's on the theme of time. Are you training for anything big right now? Like, what's coming up?
Yeah, I got, I'm going to go for the half marathon and try to get an Olympic trial standard in
Wow,
Italy.
very cool. When's that?
It's in, I think, 2 weeks.
Wow, so you flying out there?
Yes.
Wow, that's gonna be awesome. Whereabouts in Italy is it?
It's in Naples, Napoli.
Wow, that's not bad. I wouldn't mind doing that.
Yeah, man. I mean, it should be nice weather, but I mean, I feel like Colorado has pretty decent weather in the winter. You don't have to run on a treadmill or anything that often if you don't want to.
Yeah, and when is the Pikes Peak scent race? When is that? What time of year?
They they've changed it now, so it is, I think, moving forward going to be a September race,
And when was it previously?
August.
August. Okay.
Mhm.
And you've won that a few times, right?
Yes.
What's that race like?
Um, if you live in Colorado, it's a big deal. It's a big local one. There's a good prize purse, so it's going to attract a number of elite athletes, and so it's fairly competitive, and there's a lot of media surrounding it. And yeah, it's an important race for me. It's my local mountain, hometown mountain, and also it's a chance to race a number of elite runners, and yeah, I mean, there's nothing else to be said. It's just a race that I look forward to every year.
Does that race does it start on road or is it trail running from the beginning?
Yeah, you start on road and you run up to Bar Trail. So
And
you
it's
kind of
like
start in the city, in the town there.
and how long is it?
It is 13 miles.
Oh, so it's a half marathon. Almost.
I think it's maybe slightly under the actual half marathon distance, so it's like 13.0 something.
God, that's got to be a hard one. That thing's just straight uphill.
Yeah, it's tough. It's a tough race.
So when is so it start what does it start at elevation wise?
Starts kind of at I think it's called Memorial Park in Manitou, if I'm not mistaken.
And I know you have the record on there. Was that when did you get that record?
No, I don't have the course record on that one.
Oh,
I've I got the record on Bar Trail Mountain Race, the one that goes up to Bar Camp and back down.
got it. I was thinking of Mount Antero, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Is
yeah,
that right?
yeah, yeah. I got that one. Yeah.
Um was so sorry. Was that a did you just set off to do that or was that in a race?
Antero it was a FKT, so it was just kind of a project, and we were testing some new technology with a sponsor of mine at the time.
That's super cool. I mean that it seems like setting records like that must be really fun. I mean, like trying to challenge yourself and see how fast you can go.
Yeah, yeah. Those are fun records, and I mean, especially like during the pandemic, FKTs were kind of a way for you to get your competition fix because there were not a lot of official races.
Right. Okay. I didn't realize that was during COVID. That's cool.
I know I didn't do Antero during COVID. I did the Boulder Skyline Traverse FKT, and then the Enchantments over in Washington State in Leavenworth area. I did those two FKTs during the pandemic.
Nice. Okay. Well, I think we're kind of right at the 45-minute mark here. So I think we're basically ready to wrap it up. Is there anything else you kind of want to tell our audience or any advice to any future runners?
I mean, first off, just thank you guys for having me on your platform, and thank you for everyone who's listening or going to listen. Um, and I guess just for the future, man, I hope that everybody enjoys this journey. It's a blessing. It's something that's not promised or given, and so you got to enjoy every mile and be grateful that you can be out there doing something that you love and something that's healthy for you long term.
Awesome. I think those are great words to end on. Thank you so much, Joe.
Hey, thank you, Timmy.
Thanks. Thanks for listening to this episode of Adventurous Minds. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you want to stay up to date with the latest releases, you can scan the QR code or find us on Instagram at Adventurous Minds Pod. See you out there.